Chapter 11 Morning Tea. The following day, in the morning room, Tulip was working at some needlepoint while idly petting Flance as the cat pawed at some spools of thread that fell onto her red velvet cushion. Nanny was talking, presumably to Tulip, about Mrs. Potts's cobbler, and wondering how hard it would be to wrangle the recipe out of her when Lumiere entered the room. "Excuse me, lovely ladies, but my dear Tulip, could you possibly spare your Nanny for a few moments? Mrs. Potts has arranged a little tea for Nanny downstairs. I think she is eager for your company, Nanny." Nanny looked at Lumiere with a sly grin. "And yes, Nanny, to be sure, she has baked a peach cobbler for the tea. She knows how fond you are of her cobblers." Nanny smiled. "Tulip, dear, you wouldn't mind, would you? You won't feel too lonely if Nanny slipped away for a spot of tea with old Mrs. Potts?" Tulip grinned at her Nanny and said, "Of course not. I have Flance to keep me company." And then, looking at Flance, she added, "Don't I, sweet girl?" Flance just looked at Tulip with her large, black-rimmed golden eyes, tinted with tiny flakes of green, and blinked them slowly as if to say yes. "See, I will be fine. Go have your tea." And off Nanny went. Tulip didn't know what she would do without Nanny, but she knew once she was married, she couldn't justify having her in the household. She would, of course, have a lady servant, someone to do her hair, to help her dress, to arrange her jewels. But it wouldn't be the same. She couldn't imagine sharing her feelings with anyone but Nanny. Perhaps since she and Mrs. Potts had become so friendly, it wouldn't seem strange to keep Nanny on. She would have to talk to her mother about that when she returned from her trip. But what if her mother was unable to spare Nanny, or thought it was somehow inappropriate for Tulip to bring her along? That was just too dreadful to think of now. The prince peeked into the room, taking Tulip's mind off her future household concerns. She knew he didn't like Flance sitting on his fine cushions, but she couldn't help indulging the creature, and he didn't seem to notice. "Hello, my love. I have a little surprise for you. Do you think I could steal you away while we don't have Nanny to worry about? She's always snooping around and wondering where you are." Tulip's face transformed into something shiny and bright. She couldn't remember ever being so happy, not even when her father gave her a Cupcake, her favorite horse. Oh, Cupcake! She couldn't wait to see her again. She wondered if the prince would object to Cupcake's coming to live here once they were married. So many things to think about. "Darling?" His voice brought Tulip out of her deep thoughts. "Oh, yes, dear, I'm sorry. I was just thinking about how much I love you, and how sweet you are for asking Mrs. Potts to invite Nanny for tea so we could have some time together alone." The prince smiled. His forehead had puzzled out his ruse. What a surprise. "So you worked out my clever scheme? Aren't you a cunning girl?" he said. "Come now, I have something I would like to show you." "What is it?" Tulip squealed, like an excited little girl. "You will just have to wait and see, my love. But first you will have to put this on." He handed her a long white piece of silk. She looked at him queerly. "It's a surprise, my love. Trust me." He helped her tie the blindfold and led her to what she was sure was the courtyard. He let go of her hand and gently kissed her on the cheek. "Count to 50, my dear, and then take off the blindfold." He could see she was frightened. "My dear, you're trembling. There's nothing to fear. I will be waiting for you at the end of your journey." "My journey?" Her voice sounded small and confused. "It won't be a long journey, my princess, and the way will be quite clear. Now count to 50. She could hear his footfalls moving farther and farther away as she counted in her mind. It was silly to be so frightened, but she hated nothing more than the dark. Nanny had tried everything, but Tulip's relentless fear of darkness never diminished. She tried not to count too quickly so she wouldn't ruin the prince's surprise, but found herself becoming too fearful of the confining darkness. 48, 49, 50. She ripped the silk sash from her eyes. It took a moment for them to adjust before she saw the path laid before her. The tips of her toes touched the scattered pink rose petals that had been strewn across the courtyard to create a path that led right into the hedge maze. Her fears fluttered away as she quickly walked upon the petals, eager to venture into the maze constructed of animal topiaries. The petals led her past an exceptionally large serpent, its mouth gaping wide and bearing long, deadly fangs. The serpent twisted its way around the corner, revealing a part of the maze she'd never seen. It was a replica of the castle, almost exactly in every way, except without the many griffins and gargoyles perched on every corner and turret. She imagined her future children playing here one day, laughing and making a game of the animals in the maze. What a lovely place this would be for children. She stopped her daydreaming and followed the rose petals past several whimsical animals, some of which she didn't know. She often felt cheated having been born a girl, not having had tutors like her brother had, or the freedom to explore the world. Women learned of the world through their fathers, their brothers, and if they were lucky, their husbands. It didn't seem quite fair. She was accomplished for a girl. She knew how to sew, sing, paint watercolors, and even play the harpsichord fairly well. But she could not name all the animals in what in what would soon to be her own hedge maze. She felt stupid most of the time, and hoped others didn't see her in that light, but feared they usually did. Never mind that, she said to herself, and was surprised to see that the trail of petals led out of the hedge maze and away from the mysterious animals that made her feel foolish and into a lovely garden she hadn't yet seen on her visits here. It was enclosed with a low semicircle wall, and within were lovely bright-colored flowers. For a moment she thought she found herself stumbling upon springtide. It was such a remarkable sight, so bright and full of life in the middle of the wintry landscape. She couldn't fathom how the flowers thrived in such bitter cold. Scattered among the flowers were beautiful statues, characters from legends and myths. She knew that much from listening in on her brother's lessons with his tutors before Nanny would take her away to practice walking. Practice walking, indeed. No wonder men didn't take women seriously. They had classes in walking while men learned ancient languages. The garden was stunning and very much like a fairy tale, filled with the cold blue light of the winter afternoon. Nestled in the center of the enchanted garden, all pink and gold, was a stone bench, where her dearest was waiting for her, smiling with his hand outstretched. "It's so beautiful, my love. How is this possible?" The princess' smile broadened. "I arranged flowers from the hothouse to be moved here, so you may experience the joy of spring." She sighed. "You're amazing, my dearest. Thank you," she said coyly as she lowered her eyes to the flowers in the snow. The prince decided this was the moment when he would kiss her and break the curse. "May I kiss you, my love?" Tulip looked around as if expecting her mother or Nanny to jump out from the hedge maze or pop out from behind a statue. And then deciding she didn't care what they did, she kissed him. And then she kissed him again and again. As they walked back to the castle, the prince seemed happier and more at ease than she'd ever known him to be. It was all so unexpected. This day, his attentiveness, everything that had happened on this visit, really. She felt much better about their upcoming marriage. She had been so worried before, and now she would hardly recall why. "Did you hear that, Tulip?" The prince's mood shifted from gleeful to panic. "Hear what, dear?" She hadn't heard a thing aside from the birds singing in the nearby snow-covered trees. That noise, it sounded like an animal, like a growl. Tulip laughed, making a joke of it. "Perhaps the hedge animals have come to life, and they are going to eat us alive." Sorry, Queen. The prince looked as though he'd taken her jest quite seriously. His eyes were darting about as he tried to find the location of the wild beast. "You don't really think there is an animal in here with us, do you?" When she realized he was in fact serious, She became very frightened. I don't know, Tulip. Stay right here. I'm going to check it out. No, don't leave me here alone. I don't want to be eaten by whatever is prowling around in here. The prince was becoming very impatient. You won't if you stay here like I've told you. Now be quiet, and please do let go of my hand. He ripped his hand away from hers before she could comply with his request, and she stood there frozen in fear as he dashed off looking for wild beasts. She sat there fretting for some time before the prince came back for her. Oh my goodness, she gasped. He was badly clawed across his forearm. Whatever had attacked him had clawed right through his jacket and left deep bloody wounds in his arm. My love, you're hurt. The prince looked stricken and angry. Brilliant of you to have surmised that, my dear, he moaned. What happened? What attacked you? She said, trying not to let his bad temper affect her. Clearly some sort of wild beast with sharp claws. She knew it was better to ask nothing more than to provoke him into further bitterness. Let's get you back to the castle so we can have that taken care of. They walked back in silence. She felt like his attitude toward her had completely shifted again. She tried to put it out of her mind, but she couldn't help feeling his anger was directed at her and not at the beast that had attacked him. She wanted to cry, but she knew that would just make him angrier, so she walked back to the castle saying nothing, hoping his temper would improve.